Recording. Hi, welcome to the Coaching Game.
There.
I am Laurie Lawson, and tonight my guest is Adam Mirabella. Adam, welcome to the Coaching Game. So
Thank
nice
you for
to
inviting
have
me.
you. Let me tell you a little bit about Adam, and then he's going to tell you a lot about Adam. Adam is an executive coach who kind of goes around specializing in leadership development and transition and career coaching. And I think his main goal, and he's going to tell us about that, is to create a coaching culture within the business world. So I'm thrilled to hear what that's all about. So, Adam, where do you want to start in this? I know you also do a lot with emotional intelligence. So I'm going to let you start, and I'm just going to jump in with questions when I get a chance.
Great. Yeah. Look, I work with large organizations, and sometimes the culture inside those organizations, it's really hard to drive the beneficial culture that they want. And it all has to do with individual leaders. And there's a saying that, people join companies and they leave managers. They don't usually leave companies, right? They leave the manager because the manager is just not somebody that's inspiring them. And this really has an impact on the overall culture and how the culture of the organization is perceived. And where that ties with emotional intelligence is that most leaders that really foster a good culture and that drive engagement from their team, they have strong emotional intelligence. So the idea is if you can affect your own emotional intelligence, you will drive more engagement of your team and drive better results. And all of that kind of adds up to a really nice culture for the organization. And so when we talk about a coaching culture, this is a culture where leaders are figuring out ways to get the very best. We know as coaches, our job is to get the very best out of somebody else. And sharpen the skills of enough leaders. They don't have to do it for all the leaders, but if they can support leaders in understanding more about emotional intelligence, understanding more about a coaching style, then what we see is sort of this waterfall effect, and the organization starts to get a coaching culture, which is engagement at all levels.
Well, when we talk about coaching emotional intelligence, it's like, okay, how hard can this be? It's like, isn't this all just touchy feely and we'll just, be nice to our employees? How difficult is it to affect emotional intelligence? Because gosh knows it has been a buzzword for what, 20 years now? It's been out there for a while. Now it's becoming very popular. What exactly are we talking about and how hard is it to get it?
Yeah, it's a great point. Emotional intelligence is it's something that's been talked about a lot, but most managers don't know how to affect it. How can they actually change their behavior? And that's where the trick comes in. So yes, we know it's important, but if you know something's out there and it's important, but nobody's helped you to understand the underpinnings and the working aspects of that concept, then you can't really change anything. You just kind of know it's out there and you hope for the best. So what you're speaking about is the next step in this. Yes, it should be moving from a buzzword to an area and a skill set that we expect from our to improve on that unless we give them tools to do that.
Okay, I'm sorry, you froze for a second, but that we expect from our management, our business, or?
So yeah, so we expect from our leaders, but we have to give them tools to be able to do that.
Okay, great. And when you go in, I'm curious, do your clients say, Adam, come on over, we need some emotional intelligence? Or do you interject it in your leadership development training? How does that work?
Oh yeah, great question. Uh, there are some conversations where organizations are looking for specifically to impact emotional intelligence, but most of the places where I see it emerge is when a leader knows that they're not getting all they can from their team. And then, I'm certified in a tool called GenOS, which is the #1 tool on emotional intelligence for the last 4 years running, and used by companies like Microsoft and IBM. And, I use it at Amazon and places like that. And what what we see then is when a leader feels like they're not getting all that they can out of their team, or they feel like there's more being left on the table for, for inspiring their team, that's when we might bring this tool into the fore and say, let's look at some aspects of emotional intelligence and see if there are different ways that you can enhance your leadership style to drive more engagement with the team.
Well, what exactly does emotional intelligence bring to a corporation or an organization? I mean, why bother?
Well, it drives engagement, and engagement of the overall organization is what drives return on investment. It drives creativity. It drives more collaboration. It drives broad thinking. So engagement, when people are engaged, sometimes take that word for granted, but think about one of your best employment experiences. When people are engaged, they really throw themselves into their work to, beyond what's being asked of them. And when the whole organization is doing that, that's when we get on these teams and you feel like something special is happening and you're not even sure why. You just know you're at a moment in time, you're like, wow, this is really a special team. And what's going on right now are interested in how they can affect emotional intelligence because it drives engagement.
Okay. So what are some of the tricks that you use, or I won't say tricks, what are some of the skills that you use to uh, affect this? How do you get this going in a company?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll share a couple of things real quick. So
Okay.
let me just share my screen and just let me know when you're good and you see that.
There's Adam.
Right. So just as background, right now, emotional intelligence, this is the World Economic Forum talking about it, obviously before 2020, a top 10 skill. And in fact, they ranked it as number 8. But what's important here is if you look at active learning, creativity, critical thinking, complex problem solving, all of those things are affected by strong emotional intelligence. Ranked as number 8. Strong emotional intelligence impacts a lot of the others in the top 10. And here's one by LinkedIn, and you see that they have it ranked as one of the top 5 soft skills. What I would say is this is no longer a soft skill. This is an essential skill now for leaders and management. And if you think about the world we're in, not only just with COVID, but just with artificial intelligence being so prominent in everybody's lives, we move to, ask Siri, and we're dealing with Alexa and all these other things. To be able to differentiate your contribution as a manager and a leader by really leaning into emotional intelligence is going to become more differentiated and more important as we move on. And so when you asked about how do you think about it when you're in an organization, this is one of the exercises that I work on. And you really just ask somebody to think about, their strongest leader or coach or whoever influenced them the most throughout their lives or their career. And what we do is we ask them to rate them on a scale of 1 to 5, and 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, along these different aspects right here. How well do they behavior of others? How well do they make others feel appreciated? Are they open and honest about mistakes that they've made? Do they make ethical decisions? Do they manage their emotions effectively in difficult situations? And do they recognize the hard work and achievements of others? And so what typically happens in this scenario when we start asking about this with clients, or sometimes I do this in a group setting, we have the bottom line of this. We ask them, what was the total score? And then we ask, what is the discretionary effort? And when we get into the conversation part of this exercise, you'll hear people say, oh, scale of 1 to 10, geez, with my best manager, can I give an 11? Like, I always went the extra mile. I always wanted to do more. I felt like I wanted to give him or her my very best. Sometimes we hear stories where this leader was in their lives 30 years ago, but they still remember those lessons. And that's a real reflection of how powerful emotional intelligence can be. And then we ask them to talk about some of the objectives that how this person made them feel. And they usually use words like, I felt valued. I felt like I was really contributing. I felt like I was understood. And then lastly, how would you describe this leader? They use words like inspiring, authentic, resilient, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a really fun exercise. And we do this kind of the same thing on the other side. We ask about your worst manager, and you start to see obviously the other side of that coin. And this helps a leader to realize, if these were the things that I was feeling when I was being led by somebody else, maybe I should be thinking about the skills that I need to embrace to get that same effect from people on my team as I had when I was working for my strongest manager. So I'll stop sharing there in case you wanted to drill down on that, but that's sort of what we're looking at.
I love the title. We've all had an emotional intelligence experience, because I think it's like sometimes people think emotional intelligence, okay, that requires a lot of training, that requires a lot of like neuroscience, like right brain, left brain, all that. But when you broke it down that way, that's such a beautiful way to say, we've all had this. We all know. I won't even tell you how many years, but I'll tell you it's decades. I still use something that I think my very first boss told me, and it was like, I use it today, and it's like I have to let him know that, as a matter of fact. So you've made it a common experience as opposed to something that comes from higher up and we're just going to wait and see what happens. It's like, no, we're all there already. And I love that you've made the commonality. It's like, well, if a boss can have it, why can't you pass it on? The importance of passing it on. So that the simplicity and yet the effect
Exactly.
that must be fantastic on a corporation.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned the neuroscience, so I will share something with you. Leaders that do this really well, they do it effortlessly. And so we're on the receiving end. I've been lucky enough to have a couple of managers and leaders on my, from my career that really influenced me. And they do it so effortlessly that you almost feel like it's this, like it's just a gift that they have. But there really is, you mentioned the word neuroscience, and there really is some neuroscience behind it. And I'll tell you what's happening in the background. And let me just share my screen again and let you know what's going on here. But there really is neuroscience to it. And what's happening with these leaders that make such a strong impact on our lives is
Ah, okay, there it is.
whenever we whenever we have exactly whenever we have an experience, no matter what the experience is, our emotion, not our thinking brain, and we don't always get this, kind of in our mind the right way. Your emotional thing, every experience before you even get involved and before you even start with your thinking, your thinking brain, and you're tagging it as is this a threat or is this a reward? And so if you're tagging it, you're then moving from this tagging moment where come into your mind, whether it's could be the subject of an email or the way your boss asks you to come in. I need to talk to you about something that happened. It could be tonality. It could be the timing of something. My boss called me at 6 a.m. What's going on? But you're tagging something right away. And then you're moving to your thinking brain. And so what happens is in the tagging stage, if you are hearing or feeling concern, worry, these kinds of things, then you're tagging it, and all of a sudden it literally narrows your thinking brain. You start to sort of collapse and disengage. On the other hand, if you're feeling good about what you're hearing and seeing, you tag it in a different way as a reward. And all of a sudden you become broadened and more engaged and more creative. This is just a fact. And it all happens in split seconds. So what happens is we as human beings, we're in the thinking brain stage, and we don't realize that this has happened in the background. What I believe is going on with these leaders that we're just talking about is they have a natural way, even in difficult times, even when the pressure's on them and the stress is piling on them, they have a natural way of helping us to move into this more broadened state and to feel like the conversation is we're tagging it as a reward, even if there's something that needs to be adjusted that we've done wrong. And so we say, oh, I've done something wrong, but here's a constructive conversation that's going to happen between me and my leader. I'm pretty open, I'm pretty creative, I'm pretty engaged right now. And I believe that this is the magic that happens in the background with these leaders.
That's amazing. How does, or do they need you to tell them, but how does a company leader know it's like, you know what, I think it might be time to make a change, it might be time to add some of this emotional intelligence, whatever that might be. I'm so interested in I know that the the woke leaders say, okay, we could use some emotional intelligence training, but what are the signs? Okay, I think I got the question now, finally. What are the signs that a company is going to call you in and go, you know what, Adam, something's not working here. What's wrong with this company? What are some things that leaders can be aware of, and it can be a warning sign for them?
Yeah, if there are a number of them. Some of the telltale signs are this: if you are leading a team and you are consistently unable to reach the objectives that you want, so you're not seeing the results, that's probably due to engagement, some breakdown in engagement. I mean, it could be other things like maybe the goals are not set right or something like that, for sure. But if you have realistic goals and you feel as a leader your goals are realistic, but the team is unable to achieve them, you might have an engagement problem. If you are seeing a lot of turnover, which, particularly if we think about the worst boss we ever had, these are leaders that don't want to talk about turnover. Oh, that person just didn't work out. Well, that's the way it goes. Yeah, they went on to something different. Nothing we could do about it. Not so. If you're seeing a lot of turnover, that is probably a telltale sign that you are disenfranchising the people on your team, and you should be looking at that, and really you should be measuring your turnover. Where we see that there's some work that needs to be done around emotional intelligence. And then also just talking, if you're hearing your team talking about undue stress, or where stress is moving to, by the way, it's moving from a stressful situation. COVID didn't help this, by the way, to an anxiety, and we're moving to an anxious state, which is more heightened. So if people are starting to look or seem or act anxious, and it's not just a typical, well, yeah, I'm in a stressful role, what can you do? There's something more going on here. This is an example where a leader can start to look at the way that they're tagging those interactions for their employees to try to bring it more to a positive state, which will reduce stress, which will reduce anxiety. So I think some of these are the telltale signs.
Wow. I've never asked this question before, but I had someone on the show maybe like 3 years ago, and I've never forgot what she said, because she was working with women executives. And she said 80% of women who reach the top quit because they don't like the game. And I went, oh, that's ridiculous. And I went, well, no, that's what happened to me. That's what happened to her. And it's like, well, maybe it's not that ridiculous. Does emotional intelligence account for that, or is it bringing that into the picture now? The fact that there's a gender difference, and there's usually not in favor of females. Does that a part of emotional intelligence, or is that a whole other game?
Well, I mean, I think it's a fair question to ask when we talk about leadership. The question that goes to my mind is: are these women leaders leaving because they're in an environment that isn't empowering them, that isn't, those are things that might be disenfranchising those women leaders, and maybe they and this is not what I signed up for. So I think that would be worth looking at first. And then in terms of just, look, we're noticed anyway, we're all human and in some ways subjected to the same responses on pressure and goals that are set in business. Both men and women, do usually have something that they ought to be tending to in terms of the emotional intelligence that they're bringing to their leadership presence. And I think this is probably, I could share one other thing I think is probably interesting to share here. Let me just go to this slide right here. I'm going to buzz through to this screen right here, but there's this right here sort of outlines the 6 core competencies of emotional intelligence. And as coaches, we tend to know the first two, which are self-awareness and awareness of others. I call those the foundational aspects of emotional intelligence. Definitely important, no doubt about it. Most coaches work on this with their clients. So we know about those, but the ones that we don't necessarily think about, and maybe this is to your question, some of these women leaders were in an environment that wasn't authentic, where emotional reasoning wasn't incorporated into the decision making, and it left them feeling disenfranchised. I think that's a possibility. When we get to a heightened state of emotional intelligence, we actually start managing, also have the ability, think about those great leaders we talked about. We have the ability to help others manage their emotions in the workplace. And so these are heightened states, self-management and then positive influence, where we're literally helping people, inspire people to be more collaborative and more of a coaching mindset. So I think one thing that's really important to point out here is, as humans, men and women, I see the same opportunity areas, but this state here, what we call the productive states of emotional intelligence, the goal is to try to be over to the right as much as you can, understanding that we're all fallible, and understanding that there are days, if I'm particularly aware of others, and let's say I get high marks on that as a leader, there might be days where I come in and I'm just over here on the unproductive state of awareness of others, just because of what's happening around me or above me or whatever it might be. So it's important to know that we move from the productive state to the unproductive state. Really strong leaders with emotional intelligence are able to push themselves more towards the productive state more often than not. So I think that's an important thing to share here.
Definitely. So ideally, you would engage all of the core competencies, but one can compensate for the other, or like you said, fallibility. I mean, nobody's perfect, right?
Yeah. Well, it's what's great. Genos, I really am a big fan of this tool. What's great about Genos is that it has a really easy and digestible output for the leader. And it's basically a great blueprint between a leader and a coach to talk through where they want to work. So what's powerful about it is it's a short survey an anonymous survey from the people who interact with this leader. So it could be teammates, it could be colleagues that are on the same level, and it could be people above you. And it'll break down the responses for each of those different areas, like a 360, which is kind of cool. But what's great about it is it will tell this leader, first of all, what is the level of importance of that core competency to the people you're interacting with. So maybe, I don't know, self-management is less important than awareness of others. So it helps the leader see where are the people that you're interacting with, where is emotional intelligence and what aspects of emotional intelligence are really important to them. Then it tells them, okay, this is the importance. Now, how did you do compared to the importance level? And so that gives us a chance as a coach and as a client to look and say, oh, you know what? This is really important to them, but I'm kind of doing well here, doing that. And here's some of the feedback on why they think I'm doing well. Here's an area where I'm doing okay, but I'm not meeting their expectation. Their expectation is actually higher. The opportunity for the coach and the leader to say, okay, here's a real area that your team is asking for you to step up. Now let's move into behavioral coaching, which we know as coaches, and let's try to now change some behavior that will demonstrate to these people that you are making the effort and you're moving along the path of tightening up your leadership skills.
Well, and this is Genos, and I was going to ask you about that anyway. So does this come from top down and also bottom up? I mean, is this total 360? How is that administered?
It's really between the client and the coach. So I've done it where it's been a 360. I've done it where it's just been the team down. And the reason is sometimes the leader, we all have different stages of vulnerability. Sometimes the leader wants to say, you know what? I want to get this right with my team first. Let me do that first. Let me see where things come into play, and then how can I move myself along the path. Then I want to kind of take it to my my teammates, and then I'll be vulnerable with my senior leaders. I've seen it where leaders just go, you know what? Let me see the whole thing. Let's go. I want to know. I want to know what everybody's thinking, and that's cool too. It's just a different way to look at it, and it's a little bit more. You have to then digest. There will be differences. Sometimes it goes any which way. Sometimes the senior leaders see you as demonstrating more emotional intelligence than your team, which is one scenario of coaching that we lean into. And sometimes it's the other way around, and the team is really feeling the strength of the emotional intelligence of the leader, and the senior leadership is not seeing it. So that's sort of like, okay, how do we show them that you're actually really delivering strong with your team? What are the maneuvers or the changes we would make there?
Okay. So I think I know the answer to this, but maybe I don't. The importance of emotional intelligence, has that increased during 2020, or has it become more necessary as a result of 2020? And I'll just say 2020, and you'll know I mean everything. It's all the craziness that went on, and still going on, some of it. Has that increased? And I know the need has increased, that I understand, but has it increased the awareness of it, the awareness of the need? Has that increased? Or have people been so busy surviving?
Well, that's probably true. There's been an element of survival for all of us, but I actually co-wrote an article with a gentleman named Mark Nevins, who's a very accomplished executive and leadership coach. And we wrote that for Forbes. And the whole point of this article is there is a greater need now for emotional intelligence in the post-COVID world. And it's because let's face it, we're all doing things virtually, and artificial intelligence, as I mentioned earlier, is more pronounced and more interwoven into everything we're doing. And so when you're removed, one of the human elements that we all have, one of the human virtues of what we do as human beings is love to be connected to other people personally. For instance, you and I might have been doing this in person, right? If we could have, from New York City, but we're not able to do that. So we're doing the very best we can. In that environment, for a leader to be able to figure out ways to literally kind of reach through the screen and connect with people in a deeper way is very, very meaningful to the team and the organization that they're going to lead. And so even if there's small different ways, whether it's being creative in the Zoom and how we're going to speak to each other, maybe it's using breakout rooms in a way that connects new people together, but to be mindful of the fact that we're all in this virtual world and most of us are very tired of it. How can you make it more interesting, more kind of more enlightening and more engaging, I think is really important throughout 2020 and 2021 than it would have been.
Let's there, because we're running out of time, and I want people to see Adam Mirabella. You can find out more on his website. You can find out more on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for being on the show. We are out of time, and we'll just have to have a part 2 for you. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.